Over the past 3 years, I've gone from a clueless uni student with zero industry skills to a senior engineer in Australia's energy sector. And whether it was the journey from intern to grad to full-time, or full-time to senior engineer, there are 4 steps I use to own each role and make the next promotion a matter of when, not if. So whether you've just landed your first energy role or you're stuck in a junior position watching others get fast-tracked, these 4 steps will guarantee you make an impact in your first 30 days and put you first in line for the promotion, not stuck at the back of it. The reason most entry-level engineers struggle to make an immediate impact in their role is that they walk into their first day believing the same thing I did. That success relies solely on their technical output, which is just completely wrong. When I started my internship at SA Power Networks, I spent the 2 weeks before my first day cramming everything I learned in electrical power systems, electric energy conversion, and electronic circuits. I was convinced I'd need it on day 1 to solve real industry problems. But by the end of my first month, I hadn't used a single equation from any of those courses. And that's when it clicked in my head. Companies don't expect you to master 10 years of technical experience in your first month. In fact, that would be simply unreasonable. In your first 30 days, you have no track record, credibility, or proof of anything you say about yourself. You're simply a blank slate. And therefore, the only data your team has on you is how you carry yourself day in and day out as you step into that role. So the moment you step foot into the building, that data is what decides whether you become someone they want to invest in or something they're already counting down the hours with. I've now been on both sides of this arrangement. I've been the new graduate trying to figure out the unspoken rules that no one tells you, and I've also been the senior engineer watching the next intake walk in. And from the senior side of things, I can tell you exactly what kills an entry-level engineer's career before it starts. The moment your manager sees you as extra work instead of helped, you've turned from an asset into a liability. Once that perception locks in, the next opportunity simply goes to someone else. So avoiding it comes down to 3 things almost no engineer gets taught at uni. And it boils down to a framework I call the 3 pillars of professionalism. Pillar number 1 is time management. Now, time management can be broken down into 2 components. Component number 1 is punctuality. The easiest thing you can do as an entry-level engineer is use your time wisely. And as someone with less responsibilities than your senior employees, you can quickly make them recognize you by, number 1, using your time to prepare for meetings, so you can, number 2, show up in the meetings better and ask better questions, to number 3, learn as fast as possible. So TLDR, if you've got a 9 a.m. meeting, the best strategy you can apply is scheduling that 1 hour prior to prepping for the meeting, as simple as it may be, and then get into the meeting 5 minutes early, which naturally rolls into point number 2, being to respect others' time. In my experience, senior people will always give time to juniors who are willing to show up and be prepared. And so if you book 30 minutes with a senior engineer, make sure you have a direct outcome that you want out of the meeting and to prepare accordingly. This leads into pillar number 2, which is written communication. In my books, most entry-level engineers, you learn this in 2 stages. Number 1 is articulation. Things like preparing for meetings, you have to be able to articulate what you want out of the meeting, i.e. the ideal outcome, and the agenda, i.e. how you want to get there through the time space, in order to clearly articulate that in a way that you can communicate to others. Only once you're able to do stage 1 effectively can you start thinking about stage number 2, which is tailoring your messaging to suit how specific people like to receive information. A good book that myself and a colleague like to use to figure this out is a book called Surrounded by Idiots, which frames all personalities into 4 different colors who receive and interpret information differently. The third and final pillar is presence. The biggest thing you can do to command your presence at work is to literally just show up. In a world of remote working, as an entry-level engineer, although you can work from home, I cannot recommend enough showing up to the office as much as physically possible. Aim for 5 days a week for your first 30 days. There is simply no better way. And then point number 2 is what I coin likability. Effectively, give people no excuse to dislike you. The way I navigated this at SA Power Networks was literally showing up at the crack of dawn. Now, in my gap year, I worked at a winery where we literally started at 6 a.m. every morning. So through that, I developed a tendency to become a morning person, and naturally, the group that I was in was full of a lot of project managers who like to start early. And so specifically during that time of day is where I developed my best relationships, because those people are quiet, there's no meetings in the morning, so you can generally have heart-to-heart conversations with people and build those relationships, which in your first 30 days are critical to, number one, getting opportunities, but number two, being able to know who you can go to for help, which is what we'll get to in step 4. Although professionalism isn't what is going to get you promoted alone, it's the baseline expectation of any organization for an entry-level employee. Without it, the next 3 steps don't matter because you'll never get the chance to apply them. But once you've nailed the baseline, i.e. the 3 pillars of professionalism, the next problem appears immediately. Because you can be the most professional engineer on the floor and still get passed over, because in entry-level positions, you have no clear scorecard for what success actually looks like. Defining that scorecard is what we tackle next. As an entry-level engineer, because your responsibilities are limited in those first few weeks, you naturally assume success looks quite simple. Complete whatever comes across your desks, don't break anything, and simply show up. But that's not how it works. Most entry-level engineers spend their first 30 days operating on 2 assumptions that quietly destroy their first impression. The first is assuming what their manager wants because their manager seems too busy to ask what they want directly. And the second is assuming that if they were doing something wrong, someone would pick up on it and tell them. But neither is true. Your manager is busy, but not too busy to form an opinion of you. Truth is, they're forming it the entire time, based on a scorecard you've never seen. They're watching how you prioritize, how you communicate, how you handle ambiguity when no one's holding your hand. And while you're assuming you're on track, your colleague who started the same week is having a different conversation. The one you didn't have, and the one that gives them a head start you can't catch up on. At 3 months in, that's the engineer who gets pulled onto the high visibility project, and at 6 months in, that's the engineer fast tracked for the next promotion. And while you're left wondering what you did wrong, when the answer is you didn't do anything. You just didn't ask the right question in week 1. I learned this lesson a little bit the hard way. My first rotation as a graduate at SA Power Networks, I was in a project management team. It was quite a senior group and the reporting structure was more of a grid than direct lines, which meant one-on-ones with my manager weren't really part of how the team operated. I spent the rotation guessing what good looked like, hoping the work I was doing was the work that mattered, and luckily for me, it worked out to be right more often than wrong. However, my second rotation was the opposite, in a team called Network Optimization, which involved weekly one-on-ones booked in. And for the first time in my graduate career, I had a direct line to my manager, somewhere to bring questions, test assumption, and flag blockers before they became a problem. Honestly, it changed how I operated, not just how I received, managed, and completed work, but how I used the work coming up to deliberately build the skills I knew I needed to develop as a grad. The difference between those 2 rotations was one conversation early in the piece that deliberately set 2-way expectations. And you can replicate this quite simply for your situation in just 2 steps. So the first step is to establish the baseline, effectively to get clarity on what success in your role actually looks like, both now and in 30 days time. It's critical that this is booked in week 1 and no later, because the longer you wait, the more assumptions get baked in. And what it effectively looks like is a 30-minute meeting, not a Hawaii chat or an informal thing, just a calendar invite you send to your manager, and more than likely they'll accept it without any questions asked. During this meeting, you're going to want to ask 4 roundabout questions. Question number 1 is, what are the expected hours? So although on the packet and in most entry-level roles, you're expected to work your standard 38 to 40 hours per week. But in operational teams, the reality is that you may need to flex up and flex down a bit to manage operational requirements. And so here it's important just to understand what that flexi time arrangement looks like. Question number 2 is, what's the escalation path? When you come across a problem with any of your tasks, who do you go to? Is it directly to your manager, or is there a senior engineer in the team that you want to be contacting first? Number 3, what does good look like in 30 days? So effectively in 30 days time, how are you performing? How have you progressed so far? Try and get a sense of what that actually looks like. And number 4, past that 30 days, and I've put here, what does success look like at the end of the term? So if you're an intern, it might be 12 weeks. If you're a grad, it might be 6 months. If you're an engineer, generally the probation period is 6 months. So what does getting to the end of that term, what does that look like in terms of getting to that point and saying that has been a success. Really try and get quantifiable metrics, because that ultimately makes it easier to say you have achieved it or you haven't. What this does is two things. Number one is it signals you're playing for the long game, not just clocking the entry level hours. And number two, it gives you the exact criteria that will be judged on in your manager's own words. And bonus points at the end if you can set your own expectations back. Normally this looks like weekly 30-minute one-on-ones, and this single ask flips the dynamic from passive employee to proactive engineer by being forward-looking, knowing you're going to need consistent touch points with your manager and setting those up in advance. Which moves into step 2, which is to maintain that baseline, where it's all about using your weekly one-on-ones to stay calibrated on that success pathway. So every week I like to follow the 3-2-1 method, which is effectively bringing to the meeting 3 things you have progressed during that past week, 2 things you're unsure of and want some high-level feedback on, and 1 thing that you would like some guidance on specifically. Why this strategy works is that it ensures you never go more than 7 days off target, as well as ensuring that your manager sees consistent progress in writing and it's not just hearsay from the other reports in his team. This small course correction happening frequently helps you to stay on track and ultimately to achieve that success at the end of your term. Having these conversations in the first few weeks of your term is worth more than 3 months of guessing, because it hands you the targets you need to hit in your manager's own words. But knowing the target is half of the equation, the other half is hitting it consistently every single day without anyone reminding you. And in your first 30 days, that's harder than it sounds, because the work that naturally fills up your calendar isn't the work that actually gets you promoted. The first 30 days in a new role will fly past, and the work you'll get in those 30 days won't be the strategy work, the modeling, or the energy transition projects you imagine sitting in lectures. It'll be filing, data entry, spreadsheet cleanups, updating registered, all of the admin tasks with no obvious connection to the quote-unquote sexy energy work that pulled you into this sector in the first place. And almost without noticing, something clicks in your brain. You start ticking tasks off without that curiosity. You stop asking why the work actually matters from the person that assigns you, and finish each day with nothing built, nothing learned, and nothing moved forward. You're present in the role, but you're simply coasting. And here's why coasting is more dangerous than actually trying but failing. When you fail, you're always learning something. But when you're coasting with no connection to the underlying strategy and meaning behind the seemingly rudimental work, it leaves you no closer to the work that you want to do that actually matters. And in the Australian energy sector, that gap compounds quite quickly, because most of the interesting roles get filled through reputation and internal networks long before they're ever advertised. A forgettable term in an entry-level role isn't just a forgive and forget. It's a closed door you won't see open for 2 years. The engineers who climb fastest from their first roles to their second and third roles aren't always the most technically gifted. They're the ones who treat every task, even the boring ones, as an opportunity to learn, approaching every day intentionally, moving them closer to the role they actually want in 10 years. So how do you stay intentional through 30 days of work that doesn't always feel meaningful? By simply converting the success criteria you got from your alignment conversation into daily actions you can't talk yourself out of. But the truth is that this is the bit most entry-level engineers skip, and the bit that separates the ones who get fast-tracked and the ones who don't. For me, no matter what segment of life you're trying to set goals for, the same formula applies, and it's as simple as 3 steps. So step number 1 is to identify what you want. You know, for the business side of things, it could be that new car. From a power system side of view, it could be staying on casual after your 12-week internships. It's all about dialing in and getting specific on what that looks like for you. Number 2 is then reverse engineering that goal back to today and identifying daily actions that you can take that over time would result in achieving that goal. Again, going back to money, it could be saving $10 a week. In terms of a career, you could be saying, what does a graduate engineer do? What do I do as an intern? And what skills do I need to build to get there? And then from there, once you've dialed those specific, what they call salami slice skills down, it's simply about undertaking step 3, being to execute on those daily actions daily at a volume that makes it absolutely unreasonable that if you do it for a prolonged period of time, you will not achieve that goal. Now, I undertook this exact same goal setting exercise in my internship at SA Power Networks, and I had 3 goals. My first goal was to build industry connections. My second goal was to understand the sector, and my third one was to do good work. It seems simple, but at the end of my 12 weeks, if I had completed those 3 goals, I would have considered that a successful internship. And so dialing that back to daily actions, to build industry connections, I set myself the goal for every day of my internship, I would introduce myself to a new person. That was my fundamental, I must do that before I go home every day. For understand the sector, it was simple as setting myself a daily action of if I received a question or any sort of request to do work, I would never say no. And for the third, in order to do good work, it was simply for me leaning into discomfort. As an entry-level employee, regardless of what stage you're at, you are going to get that feeling of imposter syndrome. And so for me to achieve goal number 3, I really had to lean into that. And whenever something came across my desk where I was like, I don't really know how to do that, I made myself say, yes, I will do it. And ultimately, at the end of my internship, I did some good work. I made a lot of industry connections. And number 3, I understood the sector better than I did when I first was there. And ultimately, undertaking this goal setting situation is 100% what led to me getting kept on, because I created so much value that it would leave much more of a hole, me leaving, than if I stayed. And so creating that sort of value equation is ultimately how to get kept on and how to keep growing in your energy career. And so I truly believe that done consistently, that system will carry you through any entry-level role. But there's a moment in every engineer's first month that this system can't help you with, because it's the moment that you get handed a task you have no idea to do by a manager who expects you to do it. 3 weeks into my SAP internship, my manager dropped a task in my queue that made me question if I was really up to working in industry. The task involved building an information system that automated project reporting for our entire team using Excel pivot tables for the weekly analysis by our leadership team. But there were 2 problems that I faced with this. Number 1 was I didn't yet understand the project reporting structure I was supposed to be reporting insights on. And number 2 was that I had absolutely no idea how to use Excel pivot tables, literally none. The default response that the traditional education system has trained you to give is to walk back to your manager, explain you don't have the skills, and wait for them to either allocate the rest of your day to teach you or reassign the task to someone else. And before you say, yeah, Jack, that's what I was gonna do, or I have done, haha. Let's take a moment to read this from the manager's perspective. It's important to remember that they delegated you an opportunity for you to help make the team more efficient with added exposure to the leadership team. Now, instead of getting a solution back, they either have to restructure their whole day to help you make the impact they wanted you to have, or just give it to someone else. So realistically, you've turned yourself from a solution into a problem they now have to manage, and ultimately another hand to hold. So in your first 30 days, when your manager is forming the opinion that decides ultimately what comes next for you, that single moment in time can undo everything else you've built, steps 1, 2, 3, anything before. So whilst I didn't understand the gravity of the situation at the time, I didn't give this task back to my manager, committed to turning around in a week, and just got to work. But the through line or underlying question that every engineer at some point in their career has to find their personal answer to is, given a problem that you don't know how to solve, how do you go about solving that problem? And my answer to that question comes down to 3 moves that I now teach and refer every engineer I work to with. And it's called the 3 R's of resourcefulness. The first R is refine, effectively revolving around taking the broad knowledge gap or the cloudy discomfort in your brain that is saying and screaming, I don't know what that is, and refining that into a specific list of sub-problems you actually need to solve in order to deliver the task. The second R is responsible. Now that you've got your list of sub-problems, responsible is all about identifying for each sub-problem the subject matter expert or SME inside the organization who owns that domain, and thus, if you approach them correctly, can answer that problem for you. The third and final R, now that you've identified the problem, who can solve it for you, is number 3, to reach out. Effectively sending the message, booking the 15 minutes, walking to their desk, asking the specific question you refined in the first R of the specific person you identified in the second R. Now, this is probably the hardest part in the process because it actually involves identifying the way that people like to be communicated with. And in large organizations, this can vary quite a lot. Some people will answer your Teams message straight away. Some people hate Teams messages and would prefer you book 15 minutes. Some people won't accept those calendar invites and just prefer an email that they'll get to when they get to. But it's important here to really think about it from their perspective. As subject matter experts, they've probably got hundreds of people coming to them with questions. And so if you don't get an answer straight away, don't take it as an offense to yourself. You're purely trying to answer a question, and this is the most effective way. And if we go back to number 2, expectations, it's potentially something that you can follow up in a weekly meeting with your manager as to if they know them and can get you a foot in the door to answer your question. And so applying this back to my original problem with the Excel swing tables, my R1 refine was as I identified 2 problems. Number 1 was how to actually do Excel swing tables. And at that point in my career, through uni, my best responsible SME was YouTube. And so legit that full week, I spent searching on YouTube how to use Excel swing tables. At this point in time, there was no GPT or AI allowed in organizations. So I was on Stack Overflow and on Google trying to figure out how to use Excel swing tables. And then ultimately, I reached out to different people in my team to then apply that specific skill, which I learned in a week, to the project reporting, which I learned by reaching out to my manager again and asking what he wanted, into a product which I presented to leadership. They loved it and funded the fully automated version. So professionalism gets you taken seriously, expectations give you a target, goals turn that target into daily action, and resourcefulness lets you keep moving when the work outpaces your skill. Run them in order, and the path from your first 30 days to your first promotion is a matter of when, not if. But the 4 steps can't tell you what to do when your specific situation doesn't match mine. Your manager isn't my manager, and your team isn't my team. As a result, I can guarantee there are wrinkles and blockers that you'll hit that I never did. And the worst place to figure that out is alone on a Sunday night with no one to ask whether what you're seeing is normal. That's why I built the Energizing Futures school community. It's completely free and built on the premise that no matter the time, you're able to post your situation and I'll respond personally. So if that sounds appealing to you, the link's in the description. I'll see you there.